In this video I'm looking at UVLayout support for Lightmaps. So here we've got a fairly simple object with existing UVs. So these are being packed for a 1K mat, so that, there's not a lot of gap between them. So Lightmaps are typically, they can be as low as 32 pixels or 64 pixels, so obviously you need a lot more space between them. So first thing I'd do is go snap here, set the grid. So we go bottom left and I'll go 32 pixels. So there's our 32 by 32 grid. And so what I'll do is then, obviously I can go around and move things manually here, but that'd take a lot of time, so I'll just use the standard packing here. Now I need to set the packing grid to 32 pixels as well and go pack all. Right, so there's all the shells with a 32 by 32 grid. Now you can see one problem here if I snap that back onto the grid. Obviously the bottom and left edge here is on the grid, but the top and right edge isn't on the grid. That's because just for UVLayout's calculated that's the optimum shape and size of that shell for texture density, but for Lightmaps you need the bounding box to be snapped on the grid, so you're prepared to sacrifice a bit of distortion just for that snapping all boundaries onto the grid. Okay, so what we have for that is under Move, Scale, Rotate is I've got a Fit to Grid tool here. So if I go less than, it will shrink everything, so it'll probably be that size. If I go greater than, it'll make everything bigger. If I go the middle one here, it's supposed to indicate less smaller or bigger. So it'll snap to the closest grid point. So that's the one I typically use. So you can see here it's rescaled that rectangular shell into a nice square that's snapped onto the grid. Same with everything now. It's all perfectly snapped to the grid size. In situations like this, we've got this one. So again, it's the outer boundary is snapped to the grid. Internal edges here can't be snapped to the grid, but you've got most of them there. So that's everything snapped to the grid now. So what I'll do is repack that. And the important thing is to make sure you have this one turned on. Don't resize shells, because now what we just did then was rescaled everything to the grid size. We don't want to resize those shells now because they're all locked into the grid size, so we want to make sure that's ticked. For don't resize, I'll go pack all. Right, so again, if we look at it, 1 pixel to the edge of the map clearance, 2 pixels exactly between shells, so that's all good. All shells exactly on the boundary, so that's all perfect for Lightmaps. What's unperfect, of course, is that these shells have been pushed over into another tile because there's not enough room. I mean, it might look like it, but if I start trying to place these things in here, that's probably the problem one there, is I need 2 pixels there and it's too tall. So, but obviously if I rotate that, it'll probably fit. So let's go, instead of doing by hand, I'll turn on rotate 90, pack all. So here we go. So with this rotating some things around, everything will fit in. So we have 2 pixel gap between shells, 1 pixel to the boundary. That all looks good. So here we've got a bit of space left over, so probably we could get that a bit tighter, so I'll just go through that process. So what I do is shrink the box down a bit. So let's go, that's shift minus, and shift equal makes it bigger, so I'll make it shift minus. So I've shrunk that down, and if I did repack, I'll stop it there. Things are spilling out because there's not quite enough room there and I've made it smaller, but what I haven't shown you here is because I made the grid smaller, the shells now are slightly larger, they're not snapping to the grid, so whenever you change that UV box size, you need to refit the shells to the grid. So I'll do that. So now they're back on perfect grids things, and I'll try repacking that now that I've sort of rescaled things. So, you know, they fit in again because I made the UV square a bit smaller, the shells probably got a bit smaller, and now there's less white space. So I could do that a few more times until it fails. So I'll go quite a bit smaller just to show you what happens. So I've made that quite a bit smaller. I rescale everything and I repack everything. So you can see here that'll keep trying to rotate things to fit them into that one square, but it's not going to succeed, I can tell. So that's what happens if you make it too small, things will start spilling out. So I'll just do Control Z, take things back to where they worked. So that's our last good case. So that's how to pack for Lightmaps. So again, just to highlight, so that turn the grid on first. You need to have the grid on, otherwise the fit to grid won't do anything because there's no grid there. So basically turn the grid on, set the number of pixels for the map. Under pack, you need to set the map resolution, probably turn on rotate 90, and use the fit to grid here. And finally, just make sure don't resize shells is on. So those are the sort of key points for packing UV shells for use as light maps.